Okay, enough doom scrolling for now. Let's play some Xenoblade Chronicles X. In fact, isn't that new Switch coming out soon? That's something to look forward to in these troubled times. Crud. Well, when life gives you lemons and all. I'm left below. Insert obligatory call to action to like and subscribe here. Now, like a lot of progressive-minded people these days, I'm at kind of a loss. Even writing this intro, I don't really know what to say. Like, Orange Man Bad is glib and jokey, but does cover the situation, perfectly. A lot of frustration and anger and a lot of questioning of the people around me and what they care about, like what I care about. But everyone deserves a respite from that kind of rumination, and my favorite respite comes from video games. I've been a Nintendo first gamer since I was 10, and I've gotten every console day one since the Wii in 2006. Gaming's been a space apart from a lot of my other interests. Western TV, anime, movies, literature. A lot of my tastes in these things have shifted over the years towards works that are more imbued with themes that reflect my values. Not to say that I pick stuff explicitly because it's woke, but it's definitely noticeable. Now my taste in gaming has shifted too, but it's more RPGs and sprawling adventure games now and fewer platformers. And I finally see the appeal of Animal Crossing. But it hasn't really entailed a shift towards games with resonant political themes, even though such games exist, like Disco Elysium, which is supposed to be great. I wouldn't know. Like I say to my friends, real and online, when they recommend me stuff, subscribe to my Patreon and I can play games all day and have the time to play all the stuff I should. Okay, here's where a more sincere call to action goes. Subscribe to me to get me to monetization, and I can get to the first step on. Anywho, more than other types of nerd media, my video games are my escape, so the Switch 2 pre-orders getting caught up in the middle of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs came as a blow to me. Not too much of a blow like everyone else who's clued in, which is the polite word for saying hopelessly addicted to news feeds. Could see the danger to a new console launch and Trump's trade policy a mile off. I just hoped that things would work themselves out somehow. And they kind of did in the end. No delay to the launch date and no price hike for the console, but a price hike for all accessories. Could have been worse, as I groused about probably having to pay $700 for a Switch 2 in those 2 weeks of uncertainty between when the delay was announced and when the new pre-order date was confirmed. A lot of people were a bit less measured in their responses, so let's pause for a good old-fashioned gamer meltdown. Credit to r/gaming circle jerk, which banned me immediately on my first comment for reasons that are still unclear. But strap in, because we're going to slap together everyone's favorite combination of flavors, gaming and politics. And the first piece to that is understanding that gaming was already political. This part of the story goes back to 2014 and the first gamergate movement. Although old hands who were around at the time would point out that gamergate was kind of a follow-on to the borderline violent reaction to Anita Sarkeesian's feminist frequency videos about games, which were the first high-profile feminist critique of gaming, at least the first high-profile critique to be perceived by gamers themselves. The violent reaction, and seriously, it involved bomb threats against Sarkeesian's lectures, among other things, was kind of an ugly look for conservatives in the video game space. The second pass in 2014 revolved around a tempest in a tea kettle. A small indie dev named Zoe Quinn had made a game called Depression Quest. This game was reviewed by Kotaku, but one of the Kotaku writers had had some personal involvement with Quinn in the past and had an axe to grind, so accused her of sleeping with game reviewers to get a favorable review. What followed was a crusade about ethics in game journalism that swept to every corner of the English-speaking online gamer space and was coordinated by Steve Bannon and others like Milo Yiannopoulos. The rallying cry was a good wedge into the space because there were large problems in gaming journalism at the time, Like, Giant Bomb's been back in the news lately, and the scandal around Giant Bomb's formation centered around Jeff Gerstmann's refusal to give the game Kane and Lynch a glowing review because the publisher was giving a lot of ad money to GameSpot. This sort of industry capture and review inflation was all over the gaming media in the PS3, 360, Wii generation of consoles, and was still the case by the time Gamergate popped off. Any gamer netizen with strong opinions of some kind had some grievance with games journalism writ large. So it was easy to spread that rallying cry far and wide to get people to repeat it even if, "I don't know what we're yelling about!" From there you had the radicalization pipeline. A lot of people would repeat the message, and that would attract some who were sympathetic to the underlying problem, which was about harassing people like Zoe Quinn out of gaming as a whole. Now, what was wrong with Zoe Quinn, you ask? And I mean, what was really wrong with her when you pare away the spurious charge of sex for good reviews? Well, it's kind of nebulous. It's something that could probably be expressed better in pictures than in words, in the same pictures that you've probably seen on the internet a lot. Now, there's an underlying feeling to these images. Feminist women who are not model hot, expressing opinions or being assertive or mourning the triumph of Trump. Women being present in a way that serves something other than the male gaze. And then the threat which that presence represents. That public forums belong to someone other than the default man. That feeling of a loss of privilege is powerful, but if you say it in those words, you aren't going to get a lot of sympathy. Nobody likes thinking they're privileged, and everyone likes playing the underdog. Like, for that, see an older video of mine talking about right-wing rebellion. So you get into Gamergate, of crusaders for gamers, specifically standing up for ethics in gaming journalism. The flimsy pretext of a jilted ex-boyfriend of Zoe Quinn's becomes steel-manned by the real problems of gaming journalism that were rampant at the time, and all to cover up a vague but powerful anxiety among gamer boys and men. There's profit in that powerful anxiety, both directly in terms of other gate movements like Comicsgate and then the absolute sea of YouTube Rumble channels that rant about woke in media, but also indirectly in terms of the manosphere influencers and the alt-right movement broadly. For a good example, let's take a look at a few other popular targets of the Sons of Gamergate, Brie Larson and Star Wars The Last Jedi. These efforts have been some of the most successful due to piggybacking off of more legitimate problems in the source material. Captain Marvel was a successful movie, but its reception was more mixed because Carol Danvers, as written, is just not that interesting of a character, so it often leans on shallow, lean-in feminism type of tropes to make its way. The Last Jedi, meanwhile, was an incredibly divisive movie from the jump, and the Rumble nerds made a lot of hay off of that because the film generated a lot of negative sentiment, though a lot of positive, too. Two particular targets of ire from this crowd were the movie's portrayal of Luke Skywalker as a burnt-out old hippie, despairing of his ability to change the galaxy, and of Resistance Vice Admiral Holdo, who seemed laser-targeted in her design to piss off this type of Star Wars fan. And the thing of it is, I dislike Holdo too, but for completely different reasons. Like, the Holdo maneuver should completely break the canon of how the war side of Star Wars works, and furthermore, with lightspeed skipping you. Point is, the Rumble nerds found a lot of success targeting these movies because they were divisive or mediocre. People had legitimate grievances with them, and that was an open door to the radicalization pipeline. You hate movie for insert non-reactionary reason here, but doesn't it also suck because insert reactionary reason? And so they build an audience and win converts. Eventually, the logic of this approach became pretty clear. Just pick on nearly everything that could be reasonably be called woke. Chances are some of the movies or games that are targeted by these people will be bad or underperform financially or both, and then you get to crow about it and assert your go woke, go broke talking point. And for a hot minute there, this strategy seemed to be working for them, mostly due to Disney's short-run creative and commercial slump post-pandemic. The Rumble nerds were able to score wins against Strange Worlds, Lightyear, and the Marvels, but also against video games like Concord and Dragon Age Veilguard. Now, quick aside on this, apropos of nothing, I think The Marvels is a better movie than Captain Marvel, precisely because it gives Carol more characters to play off of, and is probably the best investigation of her character to date, and the action gimmick was just neat. It's a good movie. Shut up. Concord was an unabashed failure, while Dragon Age Veilguard was merely a disappointment, strong but not Game of the Year winning like Dragon Age Inquisition, sold well but not well enough for the insatiable demands of modern-day AAA publishers. In any event, woke had nothing to do with it, but correlation is enough for some bystanders, and importantly for skittish industry executives. The Rumble nerds were yelling about woke. The thing failed. Was woke responsible? The problem comes when they get it wrong, and here enters Assassin's Creed Shadows in one of the most satisfying moments of 2025 so far. AC Shadows was heavily targeted by the Rumble nerds for being set in Japan but starring, or co-starring, a black man, the historical African samurai Yasuke, and a kunoichi woman. More invective was heaped on Yasuke for being DEI and whatnot, despite, he was actually in Japan as a samurai around that time. The guy shows up in Nioh and Nioh 2 and fights demons, for cripe's sake. In an early stream for Assassin's Creed Shadows, the mainline, non-political streamer Fightin' Cowboy noticed his chat starting to fill up with racism as soon as Yasuke showed up, and responded thusly.
Like a day. There's no reason to be making comments like that. I'm gonna make this clear. If you're just coming here to get into this weird fucking race shit about a historical figure that existed in Japanese history, I'm just gonna remove you. And guess what? That means you ain't gonna be around for Kazan or Night Rain or AI Limit or any of that shit. I don't give a fuck what your opinion is of this game. I don't care. Your opinion is worthless to me. The quality of health of my morning shit had a bigger impact on my thought process today than you being upset that there's a black guy in Assassin's Creed. So shut the fuck up.
And man, was this cathartic to hear, but also illustrative of where the politicize everything strategy can backfire. With the Rumble nerds trying the shotgun approach, sometimes they hit the wrong target and lose a lot of mind share in the process. For normies, and I hate how this 4chan speak has been normalized, but here we are, these attempts at politicization only land if you have an in, if the targeted movie or game or person is bad or unsuccessful or morally compromised. If you don't have an in, if the game is good and relatively historically grounded, since AC has always been about as historical as like Nioh or Dynasty Warriors and the like historical shonen anime, then people are going to side-eye you at best, and at worst, you get called out in the manner of Fightin' Cowboy. The Trump administration is an offshoot of Gamergate in the regard that they want to politicize everything while at the same time screaming about everything being politicized. He seized control of the Kennedy Center, trying to influence the Smithsonian museums, seized control of the Library of Congress, and is trying to seize direct control of universities. The universities, especially Columbia and New York, have been the softest target because they're still dealing with the controversy from the student protests over the genocide in Gaza. The right and certain pro-Israel centrists are mad that the universities allowed the protests to be too visible and too disruptive, with thin excuses that they were promoting anti-Semitism on top. While the left is mad that the universities cracked down on the protests in ham-handed ways. And like with the video games and movies mentioned, the softer targets are the ones that flex more, with Columbia coming to the brink of allowing Trump to take over their administration directly, though pulling back after Harvard showed some backbone. More to the point of this video, Trump has politicized trade. Now, trade has always been political, I'm getting to that, but Trump's broad anti-trade views are rooted in a deep-seated instinct of his, with a Bob Woodward book showing that he scrawled "trade is bad" in huge letters on one sheet of talking points in his first admin. Like the gamergaters in their ilk with realistic-looking women in games, trade is emotionally damaging to Trump, and the first instinct of the Liberation Day tariffs was to just end it, to the point where admin officials were talking about
on other networks.
Armies of millions of people. Well,
Remember, the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones, that kind of thing is going to come to America.
Part of this emotional response was Trump wanting to deny the reality of what radically changing U.S. trade policy would do, namely create immediate price hikes for all kinds of consumer products. When he put his tariffs on autos, he told, with no force of law, automakers that they weren't allowed to hike their prices over it, trying to shift the blame onto them and away from the uncomfortable, to him, reliance on trade. Now, in the end, Nintendo's price hikes were minimal and confined to the accessories, which have always been cash cows for the console makers. But the 2-week delay in pre-orders in the United States brought Nintendo into the political drama on trade. Not because Nintendo took a political stand, but because, like everything else for the modern right-wing culture warriors, the politics came to them. But that leads to the second piece, which is that gaming was already political. This section's more of a galaxy brain take where I get to the fact that trade itself was always political. Consumerism is political. Contrary to what the ANCAPs, who, like the dinosaurs, roamed the internet in the days before the Gamergate comet came and turned them all into Nazis, claim, the free market is not really free and doesn't exist in a vacuum where preferred products and preferred lifestyles just pop into being because the market demands it. The orientation of society around cheap and widely accessible consumer goods has been a slow-moving political project undertaken by pro-capitalist governments since the first industrial revolution in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Because when I say industry, we're coded to think of like heavy machinery, steel, chemicals, or high tech. But the first industry was in weaving cloth, and the first industrial goods were clothes. Really, textiles and the direct making of clothes was still left to small tradespeople, but regardless, industry started out facing small businesses and consumers rather than capital serving capital. The second phase of the Industrial Revolution is one we think about more when we think about industry. Smokestacks, blast furnaces, etc. But that phase too saw the emergence of what we'd recognize as the consumer economy. The historian Karen Higgs wrote that consumer culture was settled on by American capitalists after the short recession of 1921-22 that followed the First World War. American businesses had done a very good job of creating tons and tons of stuff, but hadn't really thought about who would buy it, creating a risk of chronic recessions induced by too much supply. The president of the United Fruit Company in that time said, "Unless the consumer could be persuaded to buy and buy lavishly, the whole stream of 6-cylinder cars, super heterodynes, cigarettes, rouge compacts, and electric ice boxes would be dammed up at its outlets." So the culture of consumerism, of having industry build things for pleasure rather than for business, was a conscious decision of the business community a century ago, and was backstopped by the politics of the time, with Calvin Coolidge, U.S. President for the middle of the Roaring '20s, saying, "The business of America is business." Zip a bit ahead again to the early Cold War in the late 40s and early 50s, and you see political fingerprints on consumerism again. The Reconstruction after World War II left Europe and Japan in a shambles, with widespread deprivation of the kind that would make communism appealing. And this was more than just an idle threat, with active communist political movements in France and Italy, and the Soviets readily advertising their central planning approach to rebuilding the eastern half of the continent. Western leaders saw consumerism as the popular face that could be put on capitalism and on liberal democracy. The Marshall Plan wasn't just about rebuilding critical infrastructure, but about raising living standards. And the way to do that was seen through the lens of raising incomes and purchasing power. The same tactic to save American capitalism from itself got more salience with the Cold War. And this was especially true in Japan, where the country faced widespread famine in 1946. A little-known fact is that Japan had a communist party and still has it today as a persistent minority in the national diet. Both to fend off communism and to rebuild the country, Prime Minister Hayato Ikeda launched a program to rebuild heavy industry, which had initially been discouraged by the United States and other allies for fear that Japan could become a military threat again. Ikeda's program allowed for Japanese conglomerates called keiretsu to emerge, which usually centered around a major bank receiving generous loans from the Bank of Japan, and then using those loans to build up a network of companies that could support one another. Not quite monopolies, but close. And these companies became most of the Japanese brands you know today, or at least had ties to them. Sony, for instance, is not a keiretsu, but had the support of one early on. Under the Ikeda government in the early 60s, they also implemented an income doubling plan that reflected what was being done in Europe to bring the benefits of industrialization to the average Japanese citizen. Now, Nintendo's more of a unique story in this case. They were a family-owned light manufacturing business, originally making playing cards in the late 19th century. They were consumer-facing long before modern Japanese consumerism was a thing and before Japanese companies were really dealing with foreign audiences at all. But nonetheless, the rise of Japanese video games was enabled by the kind of changes made by the Ikeda government. The rise of Nintendo handhelds specifically was also aided by yet another country's politics.
I'm the man who arranges the blocks that are made by the men in Kazakhstan. They come 2 weeks late and they don't tessellate, but we're working to Stalin's 5-year plan.
Yes, Tetris was famously developed in the USSR, and the 2023 film Tetris portrays in detail the tortured path that led to Tetris's most famous iteration as a launch title for the Game Boy in 1989. Putting the handheld on the map and helping sustain it until Pokemania landed and really defined the handheld hardware line. And the USSR was famously not capitalist, but they did have computers and computer programmers, including Alexei Pajitnov, the creator of Tetris. Where their lack of any kind of market system made a difference, however, was that they could not market or sell anything abroad. Not many countries had developed console markets in '89, but you still had a trade in computer games. With tight controls on the Soviet currency and an inability to formally sell products abroad, the Soviets weren't able to capitalize on Pajitnov's creation directly. Their only option was licensing the game to foreign companies and then taking in the indirect revenue generated from the license. As for how it all went down, the film does a good job explaining that, but without the Soviets' inability to export their own software, Tetris might have just stayed an obscure Euro computer game of the 90s, and it's possible that the Game Boy could have gone the way of the Virtual Boy. Jumping back up to the present, it's a good thing Nintendo didn't hike the price of the Switch 2, or else they would have definitely made it political. Even as I wrote this script, Trump truthed out a threat against Walmart for daring to raise prices and not just eating the tariffs as is their patriotic duty. Now, I'm a good, patriotic American. I know tariffs are paid by the other country, so I'm kind of confused why Walmart would be raising prices or expected to eat anything. But that's besides the point. Our consumerism, my escape from things, is part of a political structure, and you shouldn't be too surprised when partisan politics decides to come for it. Now, the third piece is where I'm going to go real galaxy-brained on this. Gaming is fine. Consumerism is fine. Escapism is fine. To get ahead of the obvious critique, I'm not endorsing consumerism with all its flaws today, whether it's in terms of conflict minerals mined with slave labor used in electronics, or practices like fast fashion creating a mountain of waste. I'm addressing the critique of consumerism as a lifestyle broadly. You don't have to look too far to find critiques of consumerism as a lifestyle or as a method for constructing society. I remember even as a teenager being influenced by the point made in this Calvin and Hobbes strip. To live in our modern world of consumption is to play the brand's game and play it by their rules. As a consumer, you are often an advertisement. By talking about the Switch 2 here, I'm giving free advertising to Nintendo, a company that rivals Toyota in market cap. You can imagine Shuntaro Furukawa seeing this video's thumbnail in a sea of them and gloating, "Look at all this marketing, absolutely free." To that I reply, so what? It goes back to that now famous Boers comic, "Yet you participate in society. Curious." I like these things. I'm going to talk about things I like without concern that I'm doing uncompensated brand awareness work for Nintendo Co. Limited, or for Disney with my best performing video about Andor, or for Shueisha and Fuji TV for my second best performing video about One Piece. But I'm not going to settle with that To channel some Uncle Baby Billy, we in the galaxy brain phase now, son. No, there's something here that's bigger than just the sense that we like what we like. Going to get a bit more mileage out of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, which was central to my last video on the Joker. Deleuze and Guattari's book is a combination of philosophy and psychology, and conceives of the human psyche not in the old Freudian model of id, ego, superego, but in terms of a multitude of desiring machines. Desire is a machine, and the object of desire is another machine connected to it. To them, desire is a process of production, of industrial production. They tried to put psychology in very materialist terms. We aren't alienated by working or by consumption itself. Those actions are manifestations of how our minds operate. We're alienated by the contradictions and limitations that the profit motives of capitalism place on our desires. They posit the modern capitalist society as being more free than any social mode that came before it, but one where capital itself functions like a dog's leash. The dog is free to roam up to a point, but then capital pulls the leash and everything gets folded back into the model of capitalism. For a concrete example, think of capitalism critiques like Bong Joon-ho's film Parasite or the video game Disco Elysium that are nevertheless capitalistic products, or even just like Che Guevara merch. Our current society allows for these ideas to exist and even to thrive if they're marketable. That's where the psychology comes into play. Deleuze and Guattari cast clinical schizophrenia as a mechanical breakdown of the desiring machines thwarted by the limits of society, the limits of capital. Their prescribed psychology, called schizoanalysis, saw mental health as achieved by schizophrenic breakthroughs compared to the mental illness of a schizophrenic breakdown. Bringing this back to, video games and whatnot, Deleuze and Guattari saw the schizophrenic breakthrough being achieved by finding lines of escape, and that escape itself is revolutionary. That gives one hell of a high position for escapist fantasy then, doesn't it? If mental illness is the inability to tell fantasy from reality, being able to escape to fantasies like video games and other creative works while still keeping a grip on reality sounds like the peak expression of mental health. Like everything else, though, the Rumble nerds can pervert this idea of healthy escape. Anyone remember Starfield, Bethesda's big new IP that came out 2 years ago? Yeah, me neither. It's beyond me why the game kind of landed with a thud, so maybe this guy has a thought.
Nothing more than to be dragged out at every fucking conceivable opportunity so you can fucking current day us! Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns!
This streamer was, unfortunately, the biggest impact Starfield had on gaming consciousness through this unhinged rant about gender. In it, he tries to make the same claim on gaming that I do, that gaming is an escape from the current day, from the problems of the here and now that he can't change and wants to get away from. What makes his claim different than mine? Just because his politics are different? Well, yeah, sort of. What I mean is that escapism, as Deleuze and Guattari put it, would be an escape out, past the boundaries imposed on us by rigid society. The healthy model of escapism is in exploring new people, new settings, new ideas. Deleuze and Guattari often encourage people to be nomadic in that sense. What Babyface is advocating for is an escape in, a retreat into a safe space where he doesn't need to confront anything unusual or uncomfortable. Except that's not really escape, is it? Or at least it's just escape in a metaphorical sense, like someone escaping their troubles into a bottle of whiskey. What Babyface wants is to be anesthetized. Have to stop there before I get too high on my own supply, though. Like a lot of my engagement with gaming or other art is also anesthetic. Comfort shows or games I've played before. I think it's just important to point out the difference between wanting that occasionally and demanding that anesthetic experience from every new game. Particularly something like Starfield, which is based on exploring the stars. And exploring fields, maybe? Our ability to escape is under threat from these Rumble nerds, people who live in the same ecosystem as President Trump, the man who inadvertently put the Switch 2 in the middle of his tariff shitstorm. They lash out against anything that they don't understand, seeing it like psychic damage and then seeking to browbeat reality into their preferred shape, whether through harassment campaigns, a sea of videos with the same thumbnails, or incoherent executive orders. I kind of wrote this video off the cuff without thinking of a central thesis first, but I do have a couple of takeaways. First is that nothing is inherently outside of politics, even if it isn't currently a hot topic in politics. Everything we have is a result of choices made by the powerful, and in democracies by the people at large. Second is to be cautious when you see dogpiling going on online about a popular movie, show, or game. Who are the loudest voices in the dogpile, and what else are they yelling about? Third is that escapism is a good thing if you're open to new experiences. If you're not, then comfort food, movies, games, and shows are the only things that you're really going to like. All you want is to be numb. Openness to new experiences, seeking to escape, is a way to have fun and see the beauty and art of all kinds. Fourth, don't read Deleuze Guattari. I put myself through this, so I can at least spare you. Fifth, buy the Nintendo Switch 2, available in the USA on June 5th, 2025, with the hot new game Mario Kart World.
Nintendo, give me free stuff!
Thank you all for watching. Repeating my call to action from earlier, please like and subscribe to help get me to monetization so I can play more Switch 2 games. Peace!